Welcome to Craft and Antler Co. Today I'm going to show you 3 ways I use to sew our leather projects. The first 2 ways are saddle stitching with and without a stitching pony. The last one is sewing with an industrial sewing machine. Now let's get started. I have glued 3 1.6 ounce pieces of leather and cut the edge straight. I then use a wind divider to mark my stitching line. I measure the thread out about 4 times longer than the segment I want to stitch. For the saddle stitching, I need 2 needles, one on either end of the thread. To lock the needle into the thread, I pierce the thread with the needle point after running the thread through the needle eyelet. After attaching the needle to both ends of the thread, I punched a hole using 4mm diamond chisel. I pushed the 2 needles through the first 2 holes at the same time from the left side. Then take the needle at the first hole and push it through the next hole in front of it. Notice that I pressed the other thread tight and made room for the needle to go through. Then take the other needle at the second hole and get it through the third hole. After pushing it through, use your hand to keep the thread tight and downward so you can make room for the other needle to go through next. At this point, you have 1 needle at each side. Keep pressing the thread at the front tight and downward. Pull the needle on the back forward through the hole in front of it. Once you have both needles on the left side, you can keep going with the same pattern and motion. Keeping the tension with your hands is the key in saddle stitching without a clamp or a stitching pony. You can already see a slightly slanted stitching pattern forming on both sides of the leather now. When you have completed your stitching, you will want to lock the stitch in place by sewing back a few stitches. To give your stitch a final polish, use a roller and a smooth-faced hammer or mallet to tap and compress the stitches into the leather. This brings out the zigzag pattern and can reduce the friction wear on the thread over time. Now let's check out the result. Let's get ready for sewing with the stitching pony. To make proper stitching holes by using stitching chisels or pricking irons, you need to make sure the chisel is kept vertical and straight all the time. If the chisel is loose or slanted or move a little bit when you punch it too hard with the mallet, the holes will surely get crooked. What you want to do is to hold it tight and straight. Punch it with a mallet multiple times gently until the pointy ends of the chisels show on the back of the leather. A stitching pony can help achieve consistent stitching tension. You can adjust the tension and the height with the knobs on each side of the stitching pony. For me, I always start with the needle in my left hand and push it through the next hole. Then I push the needle in my right hand into the same hole, behind the left thread. I usually circle the thread on the left side behind the right hand needle once the needle passes through the hole. Now pull the needle out, then tighten the threads on both sides. Then follow this pattern and continue with the rest of sewing. Make sure you made the effort to keep a consistent tension when tightening the threads in the process. If the tension is inconsistent, meaning some stitches are pulled tighter than the others, then the tightness or looseness is going to show up in your work, which will not be pretty. Make sure you line the threads parallel to each other when backstitching at the end. If the threads cross each other, it creates a higher surface that easily rubbed against and worn off over time. Lastly, roll over the stitches and hammer them down in place so that the thread can sit in securely. Now let's compare the results. You can see with a stitching pony, I can better lock the stitches together. Let's move on to sew with an industrial sewing machine. To get started, I lift the presser foot up and place the letter underneath it. I roll down the needle to the exact point I want to start the sewing. Once I have done adjusting the letter and the needle, I put the presser foot down. I start by sewing 2 to 3 stitches forward, then backstitch 2 times, then move forward to reach the end of the line. To finish the stitching and lock the thread, back stitches 2 times and move forward once. Now, lift up the needle and presser foot. The stitching is preset at 3.5mm interval, but you can already see the difference between the hand sewn stitches and the machine sewn one. We can also adjust the interval with the machine easily. I'm going to set the interval to 4mm so that it's the same as the 2 set of stitching I have sewn previously, so we can better compare them. For leather project, you will want to use a more heavy-duty machine, so choosing the right machine is an important step that was some more research and comparison. When you use a sewing machine, the line of stitching requires 2 separate threads that lock each other in what is known as a locking stitch. This structure would mean the stitches are more dependent on each other. When one stitch is broken off, the other stitches could get unraveled easily. This set of stitching requires a thicker thread, therefore the stitching lines are more visible and attention-catching. This hand-stitched piece has a running stitch construction, meaning the thread runs back and forth on either side of the leather. It is a stronger and more durable construction. Now this purple card holder is sewn with a sewing machine. We can have a more refined and detailed look with the sewing machine. I usually switch to 3 different sewing methods depending on the effect that I'm going after. Set of stitching allows a stronger result. Contrast, machine sewing can create a more refined appearance. The stitches will not steal too much attention away from the design and the letter. And once you master the machine, your work will be so much more efficient. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe us for more letter projects.